along with the Executive Steering Committee. We have a full agenda as usual, and we look forward to discussion this afternoon. It is furrowed to, as customary. I know folks in this Zoom world are moving from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, so we're going to give our colleagues just a couple of more moments here to join us in the room for the discussion. For those of you in the community that are joining us on the live stream, please govern yourselves accordingly. There will be an opportunity for public comment. We ask that you keep your comments germane to the agenda that was posted. There is a number here. Please be ready to call. We have limited time for that, though we do want to hear from you. The number is on your screen there, and we look forward to engaging with all of you this afternoon. We'll be starting just in a few moments. Want to be conscious of everyone's time, trying to wait for critical mass. I believe we can get started and wait for others to join us in the virtual space. Thanks again to all of you who are joining us this afternoon on June 22nd. This is a meeting that is open to the public. It is not a public meeting, but there will be an opportunity for you to give public comment. We ask that you keep your comments to 1 minute and stay germane to the conversation that we're having today that was on the agenda. We appreciate you. This is a passionate and important project for the albino community for this corridor in Portland. And so we appreciate all of you who are investing your time to give us your insight into this project. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to have some project updates. We'll have the opportunity, as I mentioned, for public comment, and then the independent cover assessment team will be sharing with us for their last time today. I can't believe it, but they have been doing a phenomenal job sharing their findings that they've heard from several members of the community. They'll be having a short discussion with us today, and then we will dive into some discussion around those scenarios. We'll discuss our highway cover priorities today, and then we'll go over some next steps during the committee discussion, as well as our discussion around the priorities. We will be inviting the Executive Steering Committee for the Rose Quarter Improvement Project to join in that discussion today. We appreciate those who have taken the opportunity and committed the time today. We wanted to be responsive to those Executive Steering Committee members, President Peterson and others who wanted to continue the joint dialogue. Next slide, please. You all should be pros at the 7 principle of agreement. Give you a moment, your voice matters. We definitely need your input today, so I'll be calling on those who I haven't heard from. We need for you to speak your truth. We understand that this is a passionate project, so please make sure you are listening for understanding in this process and deal with issues and not with people. This project has created some intense dialogue, but with respect, we want you to make sure that you experience discomfort. It often happens in these situations. With that, please remain respectfully engaged. Those who are sharing today, who are presenting today, those on the committees, we ask you to keep your cameras on when you can, because we do understand there are dynamics at play at home and different things where you might have to mute your screen or in travel. So remain respectfully engaged. And then again, we cannot solve all of the ills of the albino community in this one setting. So we ask you to accept and expect that we won't close everything today. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our very capable project director, Ms. Megan Channel.
Thank you, Erica. It's so great to see our Historic Albino Advisory Board and Executive Steering Committee members together again. Hope everyone is staying as cool as you possibly can on this hot evening. Today, the main focus is really around the independent highway cover assessment. So before I start anywhere else, I just want to say thank you to the independent highway cover assessment team. We are so appreciative of the creativity, the visioning, the robust community engagement. Gina, I don't know how you've done it, and your creative approach that you've brought forward in this work. It truly is visionary and forward-leaning and how we think about, I think, not just Rose Quarter, but urban design and infrastructure projects in general and how they can be done through a strong equity lens. So I've really appreciated the hard work from this independent team in identifying those pathways and design options to help us find a design that's going to best address community priorities around restorative justice. To me, I think, this work has been especially important in helping link the history of albino, the opportunity that we have in front of us into the project space. Speaking as the project director, I just want to say through this, it's highlighted, the racist past. I want to apologize for our agency's role in displacing and disconnecting the historic albino community. the construction I-5 really cut through the heart of Portland, and disconnected the Black community. And so as we move forward, we must not repeat this harm of the past. We must show up and do our work differently. And so I think the work that we have in front of us here today with the covers is an example of that. And I look forward to building from the good work of the independent cover team for how this project can best achieve the community vision. I specifically want to thank Gina Woolley, Charles Kelly, and Nolan Leinhart as the leaders of the ICA team. And I am doing this thank you, because we are tonight are reaching an important milestone together with the ICA team's last meeting with you this evening for the HAAB. They'll be doing their final presentation and kind of reporting out on their findings of the work that they've had over the past couple months. So I look forward to seeing tonight's presentation. As the ICA team is separate from ODOT and was really convened in response to partner requests and directed by the Executive Steering Committee, we're here learning live with you tonight. And so it's important to note that their findings are objective and independent and really based on your feedback, and will be used to inform our full project design as we move forward. So picking up from their work, our next step as ODOT will be to take the range of design concepts for the highway covers and take that technical look to better understand the opportunities, the trade-offs, the feasibility for implementation, and how these great ideas get implemented into the full project design. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we can and take the next step necessary to implement the design options that are the priorities for you. So to me, and I know to our project team and to our agency, the most important thing is that we're getting this right. And so we know that we need more information before we ask you as the HAAB for your final recommendation, before the OTC makes their final decision on what the highway covers will be. So I wanted to highlight some changes in next steps and just be clear that tonight we are not asking the HAAB to make a final recommendation on the highway covers, and the Oregon Transportation Commission will not be making their final decision in July. So there's going to be more conversations happening. We may be at the finish line with the independent cover assessment team's work, but we're still in those early phases of the community conversation. So there's more to come. The ICA team, we couldn't have gotten to this point without you, and we really take that responsibility to take your work to the next step seriously. And we do believe that there's a win-win solution to achieve the goals of maximizing that land development opportunity for ownership, maximizing economic opportunity, and providing near-term jobs. ODOT's vision for this project is really about lifting all boats with the opportunities of a rising tide. So we want the community development, we want the economic development, and we want the transportation infrastructure improvement. And it's going to be so critical that we're partnered with you as we try to get it all. So in today's meeting, we just really wanted to open up and provide that space for you as the community, as our HAAB, to engage in a conversation on your priorities around the highway cover. And then it will be our job to pave that pathway in making your community vision come to a reality. So with that, I will pause and Erica, turn it back to you.
Indeed. Thank you, Megan. We appreciate your work in this. We realize it's not easy. We thank you for your acknowledgement. As I mentioned, this is passionate work for a lot of community members, a lot of trauma associated with the harms perpetrated on a community, but we appreciate your commitment to doing things different, for listening and for allowing us to hold you accountable. So I wanted to open up if there are any questions for Megan in regards to the project update. We have just a few moments to dig in there. Don't everyone lift their hands at once. All right, well, there'll be plenty of opportunity for engagement. So we appreciate that. Ms. Natalie, if you'll share the slides again. Awesome. This is an opportunity for us to hear what our other colleagues in the work are doing, things that have happened in the additional meetings for the Executive Steering Committee, as well as the Community Oversight Advisory Committee. So I will pivot to Dr. Stephen Holt with the Executive Steering Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Erica. It's good to be in the space. I'm glad that we're able to gather again with the Executive Steering Committee and the Historic Albina Advisory Board and to have some moments together. Our role tonight, or the role of the Executive Steering Committee, will be to kind of observe, listen, lean in, and be kind of the people in the background, watching as the Historic Albina Advisory Board interacts with the independent cover assessment team. And then we will have a moment or some moments at the end where we will be able to engage and dialogue together. The Executive Steering Committee's last engagement in our last meeting on June 7th, the engagement with the independent cover assessment team was to go through workshop 3. And 2 highlights, I think, that are important to share out of that. One is what you heard from Director Channel, that the dialogue and the information needs to continue in order to be able to come to an informed decision. But the desire is to make sure that your voice, Historic Albina Advisory Board, is elevated in that process so that it is a partnership and it's informed by community decision. And then the second piece was really the emphasis around the elements more than the scenarios. So not to be lost in each scenario, but what are the elements of these opportunities and options that are presented so that we can maximize the benefit of not only land, but how to make sure that we're thinking of the broader reach and the broader scope. So great meeting on the 7th, a real commitment to lean in partnership to do this work and do it together is what came out of this moment. And just want to emphasize again, there are many moving parts associated with this work and many groups that are leaning in. Tri-Excellence, which is a consulting group that's working with the Executive Steering Committee and the Historic Albina Advisory Board. The Independent Cover Assessment Team, which is separated from any of the consultants themselves and not a part of the Oregon Department of Transportation. And then, of course, we have the Oregon Department of Transportation and the work and their engineers that are in this space. We also have the Community Oversight Advisory Committee, which you'll be hearing from Janelle in just a moment. Really wanting to make sure that we can create a distinction with what these groups do, how they're doing their work, and how we can be collaborative together. So that's my update for the ESC and the work we've done.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. I appreciate that. I believe Amber is actually going to be sharing with us the update from the Community Oversight Advisory Committee. Ms. Amber.
Hi, everyone. Just a brief update. So thus far, just a reminder, there are 2 parts to the diversity plan for which the CMGC has been working with the COAC. There's the DBE work, which is the work related to the subcontracting plan and the opportunities for minority-owned firms. And then there is the workforce component. So all the way up until now, the first bit, we've been developing the specifications based on the COAC's input. And now with the CMGC, they have been providing information to the CMGC as it relates to the DBE work. The last meeting, we discussed technical assistance. And over the next 3 months, we're going to be digging into the workforce components of the program. That is my update for now, and we will be back with more information. Thank you.
Amber, thank you so much. We appreciate the work that you all are doing in that space. Next slide, please. This is our opportunity for public comment, and Ms. Mira is going to help me with that. I wonder if there's anyone in the waiting room We're not seeing anyone, but we want to make sure that we leave this opportunity for those in the community who have joined us this afternoon to share their thoughts with us today. So please indicate yourself, calling the number on the screen there. Miss Mira?
Yes.
Are we seeing anyone yet?
No, I don't see anyone in the waiting room yet.
Maybe folks are out enjoying the haze of the clouds this afternoon. Want the community to know that their voice is valued in this process. So I'll give just one more moment to see if anyone calls in, and then we can move forward. Seeing none, thank you for your patience. Let's move forward into the agenda. This time, I'm going to turn it over to the very capable independent cover assessment team and Miss Gina.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I just want to say to Megan's comments, thank you very much for all of your kind of setting a context for all the work that we've done together over the last 9 months. I haven't been here for 9 months, but we've covered a lot of ground in the 6 months that I've been part of the independent cover assessment team. And we truly do have an amazing opportunity for the historic Black community. And I think that ODOT has worked very hard to try to work with the community to materialize that. So we're hoping that moving forward from here, we'll be exiting the stage, but we're hoping that the necessary dialogue and engagement will continue, and that the project will end up with a solution that serves has the greatest amount of benefits for the greatest number of stakeholders. So thank you all. Thank you all to the Tri-Excellence and to all of the ESC members that are present and the HAAB members for working with us and allowing us to take up chunks of your agenda and to consume a lot of your time. We are grateful that we've had the opportunity to interact and try to share with you the work that we were developing over the last several months. So with that, I would like to move into our agenda. And what we are planning to do today is simply to kind of do a high-level overview of our findings and provide some context for those findings, and also give you a quick update on the work session 3 that has just concluded. The actually online open house closed yesterday, so we don't have all the data, but we will give you a high level overview. So with that, I want to turn it over to my teammate, Nolan, to talk about, to once again, just tell you what kind of a process we've been through over the last several months together. So Nolan, please.
Thanks, Gina. I really appreciate all the contributions everyone on this meeting has made, both committees. This process has gone by really fast. At the beginning, it felt like we had a long way to go between the red dot there and the blue arrow. And we're really at the end of the white arrow at this point. So what we have done is, following work session 3, we've taken all the feedback that we received about scenarios and potential elements and governance models, and we have wrapped that up into a draft CAP report, which is essentially a combination of all of the public feedback about vision and community design opportunities, development opportunities, and as well as our technical analysis of those opportunities. And so what you'll be seeing tonight is a presentation of those draft findings that we will then again share with the ESC early next week for their consideration, and then we will tie a bow on it, and that report will go from draft to final once we've had an opportunity to hear from you and hear from the ESC. So thank you again for your participation in this process. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kate.
I think it comes back to me,
Oh,
Nolan.
my apologies.
No problem. So I just quickly want to give you a recap, but I guess I just want to make a couple of comments about our overall engagement process and just remind HAAB members and the ESC members that are on the phone of how our process came to be, because we've been asked often by different members from the advisory committees, who's in the workshops. And I think it's important to remind people of the process that we've gone through, that our team, the independent cover assessment team, has gone through. We did create an engagement process through the facilitation needs assessment plan back in December. This committee reviewed it, the ESC reviewed it. You had an opportunity to identify organizations and individuals you thought needed to be contacted. We actually outreached over 150 organizations, individuals, churches in that process. And out of that came I think our final number of participants in the workshops for the 3 workshops was 53. All 53 members. We had a few members that got sick, that had family emergencies, so we didn't have 53 members in every workshop. But what's probably most important is that those workshop attendees were representative of the Black historic community. 45 of those 53 were individuals out of the Black historic community, and that included businesses, people from churches, people from the community organizations, people out of education, youth. We had 6, youth participate over a course of the last 2 workshops. So, and I think it's important that just to remind you that, early in this process, I outreached to some of you. Some of you actually did refer us to individuals that were in kind of your orbit, and some of those individuals that were referred by HAAB members and ESC members actually did participate. So just important to understand how we got here and who participated in our process. Of course, our process also included interactions with both of the with HAAB, with the HAAB members and with the ESC members, each work session, and then an online open house. So that's been the means by which we've received input that's guided our work. So with that, I want to just say quickly, a quick overview of the workshop 3. We almost all of the community workshop participants and about half of the HAAB members ranked scenarios 4 and 5 as preferred highway cover scenarios as in the live poll. So if you recall, for the HAAB meeting, we asked you to rank the scenarios and the hybrids together and to rank them in the order that you preferred them. So it wasn't like you were picking one, it was simply you were giving us a sense of what resonated with you. Scenario 1 was ranked the lowest by the majority of Black historic community participants and by HAAB members in the ICA team's live polls in work session 3, but it was ranked the highest by the majority of ESC members. And I believe that we had 7 ESC members that actually, we had in this question about scenario, we actually had 7 members that participated. The 7th member only voted related to the scenarios who participated in the live poll. So that's kind of the feedback that we got right now. As I said, the online open house has just closed yesterday, so we don't have any feedback on that. On the hybrids, we asked all of you to rank the hybrids because we heard so much feedback related to the issues about schedule and delay that we tried in our after work session 2 to actually create alternative pathways that may provide a win-win for both the community and for those individuals who wanted to minimize schedule delay. And the workshop participants preferred hybrid 3, which is really a variation on concept 5. The HAAB members preferred hybrid 2, which is really a variation on concept 4. And the ESC members preferred hybrid 1, which is really a variation of the concept 1. So, and then finally, in relationship to governance, as you recall, we asked a question about governance. Nearly all of the community workshop participants strongly supported the creation of a new governance entity to ensure that the development of the highway covers meets the Black Historic Albina community goals. And about a third of the HAAB members supported this action. About a third were neutral. And another third did not support the creation of this new entity. And then about 3 of the 6 ESC members that voted on this were neutral, 2 supported it, and 1 did not. So that's kind of the feedback that we have coming out of the last work session, and the kind of blush in time that we took with you related to our material. So with that, I think we now go to Kate. Kate White.
Great, thank you, Gina, and thank you, everyone. Pleased to be here. Kate White, I'm been the technical lead on the independent cover assessment, and really happy to be able to share with you our findings from a culmination of all the workshops that Gina just outlined, and all the input from you. And I want to thank you for your service on the HAAB and the ESC. So before we get into the findings, there's a few kind of considerations that we wanted to lay on the table, make sure you're all aware of sort of the context within which we have done our independent assessment, and some of the constraints that we've been dealing with, and just make sure that you all are aware of those. So number one, there is a there's a 20% design that that ODOT is undertaking, 20% design, and that includes some design changes that are different from what was approved in the environmental assessment, and they will need to get approval. ODOT will need to get approval for those through the Federal Highway and the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Secondly, construction schedule. We are the current construction schedule. Our assessment is that it doesn't fully represent some of the significant political risks that could delay the schedule. Thirdly, the project costs. So the last estimate from ODOT was in this cost to complete report from January 2020. You can see this 715 to 795 million. And that was based on the 15% design. And a lot of things, again, have changed in the design as it's evolved. So we don't have, the very latest 20% design to really do apples to apples comparison. So we did the best we could with the information we had. So that's what we're going to share with you today. Rose Quarter Improvement Project is our QIP. Okay. Secondly, funding sources. How is this all going to get paid for, the Rose Quarter Improvement Project? We're not even talking about anything above the cover yet. So the latest bill, HB 2017, allocated $30 million annually for the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, RQIP, including the covers, beginning in 2022. But the source for the gap between what it's really going to cost and this annual allocation is still unknown. And then on the DB contracting and workforce opportunities, as you heard earlier, the diversity plan is still not complete nor adopted. So we had a hard time estimating the timeline for the job and the contracting benefits. And then finally, as we go into this, obviously, I think we're all aware that the Rose Quarter Improvement Project does not have all the public partners at the table that it really needs to move this forward. Must attract additional funding, as I mentioned. It needs additional support and partnerships to move forward with the federal reevaluation of the environmental assessment design refinements. We hope that our independent cover assessment can be the beginning, hopefully some of the tools to provide a pathway that can bridge some of these project gaps and create some win-win solutions for the community and the project. With that, we are that's some context setting, and we're going to share with you our findings, summarized findings for 3 areas: community vision and neighborhood framework, design scenarios and elements, and governance. And a lot of this should not be new to you, but it's just, we tried to sum it all up here today. So I think with that, I'm turning it over to Kate Brooks on the ZGF team to talk about the community vision and neighborhood framework.
Sure. Thanks, Kate. I want to apologize in advance for my voice. It is a little froggy. Thank you to my children who are now attending daycare, and this is what happens. So, as Kate said, that was sort of the context and the background of our findings. What we did was we really identified 3 critical areas of findings, which are the community vision and neighborhood framework, the design elements or design scenarios and elements, and governance. So, the community vision was really formed through work session 1. And again, we had feedback in work session 2. We heard consistently through those work sessions from the community and from the advisory committees and online open house that there really were 10 top program priorities that were, again, consistently stated as something that the community would like to see on the covers. And we've shared those with you. The top priority that emerged from community workshops was really the amount of land, and not just any land in acres, really high quality developable land that's created for the community to use and to own. I think there was one quote from a workshop that said, if you don't own it, then you don't have wealth creation. Some other community members expressed their highest priority really is related to the jobs and contracting opportunities for the Black community members and disfavored scenarios that would potentially create a schedule risk. And that's something that we've talked about before. So the ICA team created what we're calling a neighborhood framework to respond to all of the feedback given to us in work sessions 1 and 2. And really it's summarized and boiled down into 4 design principles, excuse me, which is maximizing, high quality developable land area on and around the covers for community use and control, providing flexibility for future development by designing the cover to support both buildings and gathering spaces, restoring streets across the highway to create active frontages for development, and prioritize safer pedestrian-oriented routes and minimize the highway's noise and air pollution. So within our scenarios, we had a number of design findings. This is, very similar to what Gina just went over. But we found that in scenario 1, due to the ramps intersecting the streets and blocks on and around the cover, It provides the least amount of high quality land, but it is fairly consistent with the EA, so it has the least risk of schedule delay. Scenario 4 does actually provide the most amount of developable land with the merge of Flint and Vancouver, but with those reconfigurations of streets, there will be some transit delays, and we do have some quantifiable numbers for those delays. But it isn't consistent with the EA, so it does have a moderate to high risk of schedule delay. Right now, we're estimating 14 to 24 months for that. Scenario 5, similar to scenario 4, does also provide a larger amount of land than scenario 1. And unlike 4, as you all may recall, it has the restore the grid concept. There will still be some transit delays, not as much as 4. And because it's not consistent with the EA, it has a moderate to high risk of schedule delay. Again, we're looking at 14 to 24 months. So with all of that, we did our development assessment framework to evaluate all of these scenarios to see how they compared. And scenario 5 scores the highest in our DAF, or development assessment framework, which, our outlook is that's creating the greatest potential for community outcomes on these covers. So if you all remember the elements, and I'm sorry I don't have a visual for you, but what we found in reviewing the elements was that element F, which is just the southbound ramp, moving that south, does increase the amount of land area with less impact than moving element G. So that's the northbound ramps. And it will create a moderate risk of schedule delay. We're showing 14 to 24 months as a range, but it'll probably be on the lower side of that. Moving elements F and G, so that's both ramps south of Weidler, creates sort of the most amount of land and the most continuous, multimodal access across the area of the covers. But it's gonna go on the high risk side of the schedule delay, and again that 14 to 24 month range. So with that, I'm gonna hand it back over to Kate.
Great, thank you. And I know this is a lot of information, but I did want to say that I understand Erica sent this whole PowerPoint out earlier today. So it should be in your inbox if you want to reference it more. So there's a lot of information here that we're trying to summarize. So refer to that if you want to take a look at it again. So on the technical and cost findings, the 3 scenarios that we studied in depth, and we did pretty detailed cost estimating for scenario 1, 4, and 5, are in the range of 819 to 998 million construction costs, and they don't vary hugely. I mean, these are big numbers, but it's a 10% give or take between the 3 scenarios. We assumed in the cost estimating in our preliminary design that they could support 2-story buildings. The covers could support 2-story buildings. To get up to 5 stories, there would need to be additional foundation work to support the structures. And that would be an additional cost above the numbers in the first bullet of 172 to 193 million or so. And buildings taller than 5 stories would really be prohibitively difficult to build with the current width of the main line of the highway. And the width of the highway is based on, we assumed the full ODOT, 20% design, the full travel lanes and the shoulders. But we, as your independent assessor, we do feel compelled to point out that this is really out of line with this width for an urban highway tunnel, which is basically what this will be, is we looked across the country, and there's really nothing this wide that's being proposed or built in an urban area. And so we are recommending that there be a more performance-based and context-sensitive approach to look at the width of the highway and the shoulders, and look at the opportunities to reduce costs, improve ramps, reduce the amount of right-of-way that would need to be taken, and also improving the community development potential. In terms of the delays, potential additional time that some of these technical studies would need to take, we estimate it would be an additional cost of about 3% a year for inflation. So mobility findings. You know, a lot of people are focused on, you know, the mobility issues and the surface streets, and how are those going to work, and how do they reconnect the neighborhood. So in looking at that, we are really taking a fundamental shift in design approach for the area, from an auto-focused street network to a pedestrian-oriented street scale. And you'll see in our final report in the next couple days, our draft final report, some streetscape images that kind of represent this. And you'll see that we're really looking to support placemaking and wealth creation outcomes along the street, create addresses, and instead of just bridges, you know. And the this type of shift in design approach really needs to call for an increased amount of space within those surface streets, over the covers and around the covers. These surface streets need more dedicated space for pedestrians, bicyclists, streetscape amenities like trees, and that means, you know, reallocating the space for automobiles. We're not calling for, you know, wider surface streets, but we're talking about reallocating the proposed street widths. And in terms of what's the impact on traffic, because that's the next question, of course, if you're you know, reallocating some of the roadway space, the street space on the surface streets. We did run several traffic models, and we are seeing some increased vehicle delay at some intersections. More studies would need to be done, but we didn't think these were fatal flaws. It's, you know, we're talking about seconds. We're not talking about half an hour. And so we thought that that type of trade-off would be worthwhile. And in terms of transit, we still need to look more on the transit route impacts, but again, it's really seconds, not even minutes of delay for these reallocations in some of our scenarios. And there's ways to prioritize transit through other mechanisms, like make sure signaling timing, like as the bus approaches, that they get the green light. So those are some of the design changes that we're, or operational changes that we're going to be proposing. And in some cases, with our scenarios 4 and 5, some design adjustments might need to be made to make sure we accommodate the large trucks coming off the highway. And then, you know, there's a lot of question about the environmental assessment, the EA, and what's going to be the implication. And so we've pulled in some great environmental experts that really, since you last saw the schedule estimates, additional schedule, have really honed their look at our scenarios, and they are again looking at a 14 to 24 month additional schedule to do the technical studies that would be needed to be able to move forward with scenarios 4 and 5. And so, you know, we really feel like that that time, which could overlap. We don't have a super detailed schedule from ODOT, but we feel like some of those 14 to 24 months could be overlapped with their current schedule. So it might not be a delay. It just, that's the time that we are estimating it would take. It could, if it started sooner, it could be done sooner. You know, no matter what, there has to be some type of Federal Highway Administration reevaluation. And we feel like these scenarios could be included in that. And we also think that this really is a moment in time to include restorative justice outcomes for the community. And that if you've been following anything with the Federal Highway Administration and what and the Biden administration's new executive order that is focused on social justice, environmental justice, and the new Secretary Buttigieg, there's a lot of focus on how to redesign these type of projects to make sure that they really are beneficial to the communities through which they went through, more beneficial. And so I think there is definitely some win-win solutions here. They will take some more time, but they're definitely on the table. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Olivia to talk just a bit about our governance findings, and then we'll have hopefully plenty of time for a little time for discussion as well.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be back with you. Thank you so much for making this time for our final presentation and discussion with you all. So just briefly, I'll go over some high-level findings on governance, really, which I think align with a lot of what we've been talking about all along from the independent cover assessment team's perspective on governance, informed by the community outreach we've done and what we've heard in meetings with members of the ESC, HAAB, and COAC. So the first is that linking the creation of the highway covers to restorative justice outcomes requires a governance structure that establishes a clear leadership role for community stakeholders, defined as members of the historic Albina community, their descendants, and stakeholders in Portland's Black community today, to determine the future of the highway covers and also the neighborhood more broadly. You know, we've come to understand through this process that restorative justice here is not just about what gets delivered or how the highway covers get delivered and what gets delivered on them, but is really about a vision for restoring this part of Portland and this part of the Rose Quarter as an important center for parts of Portland's Black community. To support that governance structure will require a flexible framework for creating a governance entity that can evolve over time. It needs to start now so that this governance entity can build up capacity, has time to set a mission, a structure, and think through its different stages over time as it moves from working with ODOT on the rest of the planning process for the highway covers to delivery of those covers, to how it uses the cover development rights and remnant lands. While initially it could and should be resourced by public sector partners in this project, it should also become an independent entity as it moves forward. This links to the second point here, that control of future development on the highway covers and remnant lands made available after the Rose Quarter Improvement Project's construction is a priority for the community most impacted by the original construction of I-5 through the Rose Quarter. So particularly, as I mentioned before, members of the governance entity or governing entity going forward should be linked to and have a deep understanding of the community that was most impacted by that original construction. And ODOT going forward should work with its legal counsel and public sector partners to identify the right mechanisms for transferring ownership and control of areas for development to a community-focused, Black-led governing entity that can deliver on the community's priorities going forward. Finally, under the right conditions, future development on the highway covers can deliver on community priorities and help community stakeholders really make progress toward and achieve their goals. Regardless of the form of the highway cover governance entities, ODOT is likely, or ODOT will need to retain ownership of and should retain responsibility for maintenance of the highway cover structure. But there are ways that the development rights and their control and eventual use can be transferred to a governing entity to make it possible for development to happen in a way that is community focused and delivers on community priorities. With respect to remnant land, as ODOT requires that land, it can be transferred, or its ownership could be transferred to the governing entity, again, for ownership and use. And there are a number of tools and mechanisms available to support community-focused development that would align with the priorities that we heard through our community outreach, from shared ownership models like a community investment trust, to mission-based models or goal-based models like a community land trust or CLT, to financing programs and tools that are specifically available for affordable housing and other uses. I'll stop there since I know that we want to have enough time for discussion, and turn it back to Gina to facilitate.
Thanks, Olivia. So I've made a list of some questions that were in the chat, and I just want to go back through and see if, Kevin, you had a question about highway width. I wanted to know whether some of the information that Kate provided was provided you with some perspective on what that was relative to, or whether you would like a more elaborate response from either our team or the ODOT team. So.
Well, I can't tell if there's a scolding from you or an encouragement, but I understood.
It's encouragement. It's encouragement.
I understood, but I would like to hear a little bit more explanation to the group that's on the call. And I think we all come by little threads of this or that are news articles, and some are accusatory, some are supportive.
Kevin, it's hard to hear you. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh. Basically, an explanation to the group, I think, is appropriate. Because we all come by all types of information, some supportive, some critical, but this seemed to be a very important mention that seemed to just be in an article and not a lot of explanation.
Gina,
Yes.
I was going to say, I think, I mean, you heard our take on it, the independent cover assessment. I really think it's a question for Megan and ODOT to kind of, just say where you are with the width of the highway.
Yeah, so Kevin, good question. Thank you for bringing it up. So for the current design that we have, which again is at a 20% level, so we still have a lot to go. We are assuming 12-foot widths for the through lanes, for the auxiliary lanes, as well as the outside shoulders and the inside shoulders. So all of those elements are assumed to be at 12 feet each. And that is based on current ODOT standards. And the point that the ICA team has brought up is kind of an element of design that we'll consider as we're moving forward, of what might be the most appropriate widths given the context for each of the areas. So just want to be very clear, though, that the lanes and the shoulders today in the current project are assumed to be at 12 feet each.
So in the article that I was referencing, it mentioned that nowhere in the nation is that type of standard present for the type of construction we're talking about. So what is the difference that makes this important to ODOT? What would be the benefits, the detractors, the dangers? Explain that to us.
Yep, absolutely. So the article I believe that you're referencing is the Willamette Week article. And it referenced the ICA's work with the 8 examples of other tunnels throughout the nation. And so those were the examples that did not include the shoulder widths that we have proposed currently in our project design. There are other locations throughout the US that do include 12-foot shoulders, just not in those examples. The 12-foot shoulders are really intended to provide space for the vehicles to pull out of the way of traffic. Like if there's a disabled vehicle, to pull out of the way of traffic and have that safe space also for emergency responders to use the shoulders to get either to an incident within Rose Corridor or beyond Rose Corridor. And then there's also an active conversation happening around the potential for bus on shoulder to help improve transit times through this area or to provide space for new transit opportunities on the I-5 corridor. But again, we are early in design. We have a lot of practical design to go in making sure that we're picking the right widths for these locations.
So here's what concerns me. They mentioned specifically the I-5, the viaduct in Seattle, the rebuild. They've got more traffic than we do. Don't know if that's been a problem for the populace there. I mean, if ODOT's position is one of public safety, right, for vehicle safety, operator safety, for improved future predictable bus, I think that should be said, because otherwise it seems like this one niggling little detail will be a giveaway that's not really a giveaway if it's not stressed as something important, if you can follow my logic on here. I think this means a lot to everybody, and to include those that are going to build the project.
Megan, did
Sorry,
you
I
want-
was on double mute.
Go ahead, President.
Sorry about that. Hey, Mr. Modica, thank you for bringing that up. And this is exactly why we're having this process. I mean, we're taking an examination of this and bringing it to you so you can ask those tough questions. Now, things have been caught up lately, and there's been a lot of question of trust, right? And when we sit here and dance around questions, it only magnifies that by 1,000 times, right? And I feel like we've been bringing up a lot of these good. I think that is an item that we need to dive deeper into. And as Megan said, we're at 20% design. And I just want to make a quick comment before we move on to the rest. And it's related to this, Mr. Modica, and I've heard this from Mr. Washington, and I've heard this from Ms. Leslie Goodlow, and from other members of the HAAB community. And I think we're hearing it, and it's guiding how we're moving forward. And it's about this question of trust, and it's about what Megan said earlier about this racist past of this agency. I wouldn't trust this agency. We can't just say trust us, have a couple meetings and say trust us. It doesn't work that way. And so I want you to pardon my directness. I used to work with this guy at the city of Portland. Boy, I loved him. His name was Dante James. And Dante would say to me, Brendan, I like you. You don't speak Portland polite. You get straight to the matter. And so I'm going to write here. And that is, you should not trust. And as you're seeing through this ICA report and what I'm hearing from all of you and what I've been listening. I haven't been jumping in and saying anything. I've been listening. What I've been hearing from all of you is ODOT do not trust us to create a transformational project. You know why? Because we can't do that. We're not equipped to do that. That is not in our lane if we're talking about lanes. And that's what's being identified here by the ICA. Good work by Olivia on diving into a lot of these different things around governance structure. We have set this table, since I took over their mobility office, and since we've done this, we're going to do one thing. And for those of you who I've earned a little bit of credibility on, I just want to say this. You can trust me for one thing, and that is to tell the truth. And the truth is that ODOT cannot deliver a transformative project, right? It's out of our lane. Now, Miss Leslie Goodlow, Mr. Nate McCoy, we would have never asked PBOT to run the Northeast housing strategy for us, right? We had to bring in a family to do that. We've tried to do that. You have guided our way, and what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, you guys can't do that. So we will tell the truth, and we will continue to do that. And I just want to give my props to the ICA team for helping us through that, helping us see these other sides, helping us see these other things, having those questions come up in your mind, Kevin, that you're the right ones. Now, I don't, things are being said out there about us and trust. You can trust that. One thing I want everyone on this call to know is that for those who say that we don't want a transformative project, that is not the truth. We do. We just do not know how to do it. It's not in our lane. It's not what we're supposed to do. Now, I apologize. Again, not very Portland polite of me to speak so directly, but I feel like I need to say that on behalf of the agency. So with that, Mr. Modica, I went off on a tangent there a little bit, but I've been waiting to say that because I've been observing your work. Wanted to thank you for that. For everyone that's been on it, I've been listening to you, Mr. Edwards. I've been listening to everybody on this call. Appreciate you and your work. We're listening. And as we move forward, as this goes in its next step, you have my commitment to making sure what you've identified and what this ICA team has identified is going to move forward. It's not going to sit on a shelf. And I guess I'll stop there because I'm starting to rant. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Mr. Finn. And I have high interest, particularly the ICA folks, Kate, and knowing where this is going to sit down. I just have a notion that it's going to be a missed issue that is of vast importance to our community.
It's hard to hear you, Kevin.
Still hard to hear me. Sorry about that. Trying not to take over airways. Thank you, Mr. Finn, and hopefully to the ICA folks, you stay transparent with what it is about the lane widths and the purposes for that. We have freeway ramps that go nowhere, and we were told, oh, this is for the east side bypass, or this is for the return lane to Northwest. And those stinking things have been there for 25, 30 years. So, if you're going to have extra lane width for future projections, be very transparent, please.
Ms. Gina, you're muted. I wanted to jump in. I know you have Jana and Mr. Edwards both have their hands up.
All right, Keith, please.
Thank you, Gina. And thank you very much, Kevin, for bringing that point up. And Brendan, thank you very much for addressing it. I just want to be clear that while we're having these discussions and these meetings, these conversations and moving forward, it's been real clear to me that we expect ODOT to be an advocate, an ally, and supporting our intentions for this development. This is not just about the covers, it's about this whole development, it's about the future of our community in this particular area. And so we need this to be a template. And we also, like I say, we need to have ODOT, we need a commitment from ODOT that you're going to be advocating for us to make sure our agenda is heard and make sure the intent of our agenda is has an outcome that is satisfying to this community.
Thank you for those comments, Kevin. And I think it's important. All we've done is hear the community and put forth what we've heard out of the community. And it's going to be incumbent on the people left in the room when we leave the room to continue this dialogue because we won't be. We're going to document what we've heard and what we've studied as a result of what we've heard. And then it's going to really be up to all of you to carry the water forward and make sure that the things that you're talking about, Kevin and Keith, that those things are, that, you know, there's accountability in relationship to ODOT for those things, and how things get designed and how they're explained and what they're intended to do and all of that. So we won't be in the room. Our job has simply been to deal with the covers, but you're correct. There's a lot more than the covers to this project, obviously. So Jana had her hand up. Jana?
Thank you. I wasn't sure whether I could speak at the meeting, but I couldn't help myself but put my hand up. I think on the topic of lane widths, we have to recall and we have to remember that this is a hugely important freight corridor, this section of freeway. And I think some of the comparisons to other projects that have been built are not comparing apples to apples. If you're going to build essentially a tunnel through the downtown Portland, and you're going to run the volume of heavy trucks through that region, you're going to need not only the lanes, but you're going to need the shoulders for emergency purposes. And so I just wanted everybody to remember how important that section of freeway is for commercial traffic, because everything going in and out of the ports, a lot of the freight between Canada and Mexico, it all is all running through that region. So don't forget the freight aspect of that. Thank you.
So we have several hands, and I guess what I want to know, Dr. Holt, is do you want to facilitate this discussion, or do you want me to keep facilitating this discussion, since some of this is not specifically related to the ICA and the questions related to our work, but is more related about questions to the larger project? So what would be the best course forward here? Because I know we are into a discussion period, and I would like to have your wise consultation at this point.
Appreciate that, Gina. I think if we can keep the questions current around ICA work, and then anything else that is beyond that, we can parking lot. And if there's time for us to come around and address that, we will do so. So really want to make sure that the HAAB is being heard tonight. This is their meeting, and then the ESC and HAAB will have their 30 minutes together afterward. And so I will defer to Erica in terms of making sure, again, that the HAAB is elevated. We want to keep things moving forward in that regard. So to my ESC members, if you can hold your comments and thoughts until later, please do so. I would appreciate it. We want to hear your voice, and there's going to be space for that. So, but Jana, thank you for weighing in where you did. Appreciate that. Gina, does that help out?
No.
I'll just highlight for Erica and Gina, there are a few questions that were thrown into the chat that we still haven't gotten to. So I think the idea with this 30-minute period was that we're able to, the folks who just made these presentations are able to answer as many questions as possible.
So I guess what I would do is entertain questions specific to our work and our findings that we presented. And if people could, if your hands are raised, so I know who to call. If they're related to our work, keep your hands up. If not, I'm sure park it, and I think Dr. Holt will come back in the larger discussion. So I have two individuals. I think I have John Washington.
Thank you, Gina Willie. And Mo Dig, it was good to hear from you, man. But in one of those questions in the chat, and it's been always nagging at me for a long while, is that we preface these findings around the community involvement and the community engagement. And one of those things in there that James Posey posed inside of this thing, and he stated that a lot of these findings are rooted in 50 people or 50 clicks, whatever you want to call them, but it's less than 1% of our community. So, I mean, how do we gauge, or how do we begin to measure or begin to recognize if that truly is, whatever the message coming from the community is truly a community message. Number one, because it's really starting to affect me in a negative kind of way when we keep hearing this fact about community, but it's only 50 people. And I can get my Rolodex and get 50 people and tell them to tell you what they need to tell you. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that. So could somebody address how we gonna move forward with that, with all that information that we build on 50 people? How do we know that that information is coming from the community in a way that if the community really decides to respond, at least 5%, what would that look like?
So I guess, John, what I would say to you is that all of you knew what the process looked like. Part of our problem was COVID. Part of it was just that people weren't, most of the community organizations were kind of taxed. We didn't get a lot of response, but we have a broad cross section of people. I mean, we have a business that you recommended to us. So we do have people that were recommended by the folks that are in the room here. And it is a representative sample. I think that the larger the sample, the better the information, absolutely. So, you know, that's something, if ODOT chooses and moving forward to broaden their sampling of this, or however this goes forward, it sounds like there's going to be more thinking about what needs to happen. You're welcome to do that. We have, I think that the voices that we've had in the room are legitimate folks, and what I can tell you as a community member myself and somebody who's lived in this community for 50 years, the people who have been harmed by the freeway have a certain perspective on what restorative justice looks like. And we've had a lot of those people in the room, and we tried to get some of the contracting community. I reached out to Nate, and I know everybody's extremely busy, to see if we could get people from the contracting community as part of our workshops. We didn't pick and choose. We took everybody who would come through and commit to attend these community workshops. And I think I feel justified in who was in the room. I think we had a good cross section of community representation in the room. It was small, granted, but it isn't. If you bring more people, I'm not sure you're going to get necessarily a significantly different weighing in. You're just going to get more people. But I think that's something that you, as the HAAB and the ESC members, can decide if that's an important thing to do moving forward.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, I want to jump in real quick. I see my friend, Mr. Posey, and I'm glad you're here. Glad you're in the space. We are going to prioritize HAAB interaction at this moment. And as we transition, I'll give you the opportunity to jump in. So hang tight with me. We're not ignoring you. Appreciate you being here. And it's always good to see you. You're always thoughtful. So we'll continue with HAAB. And as we transition between HAAB and ESC, I'll make sure you have some moments, okay? Thanks, sir. I saw your thumbs up. So just want everybody else to understand one of the things about these opportunities that's so important, and I'm excited about the fact that we're able to do it. It's been a long time coming. We've been pushing for and working for a moment where we can get the community, those who have been invested, stakeholders, longtime stakeholders, current stakeholders, thought leaders, influencers, us, into a space where we can talk and think together to move decisions as a unit. Far too long, we've been fragmented over nothing, and it has kept us and harmed us and hurt us. We have an opportunity to do something huge and do something better. So we want to make sure we're optimizing that. Back to you, Erica and Gina.
Well, I think
it looks like, we have a couple more hands. Yeah,
Estelle, can I take your question, please?
I think actually, would it be possible? Could I yield to what Miss Sharon just said in the chat, because I think it was really important and really kind of more in line with Mr. Washington just said. And if I could, I Could I do that, please?
Absolutely.
I believe I saw Sharon in the room.
I think you also had your hand up.
Is she here?
I am sorry, I am here and I am battling vicious vertigo. If any of you've ever had it, you can appreciate it. If you haven't, you don't want it. So I am talking to you and I'm spinning. And that's why I took my hand down. It is heat related. And so it's only going to get worse through this weekend, the doctor said. That being said, the reason I put in the chat is the question constantly of what's critical mass for our community? Critical mass is when we were together in Lower Albina, to me, when we could count the numbers, we had the numbers, we owned land, we had progress in economic development and social interaction. Those are the things for me as a legacy child, and for many of us, that constitute community. And our voices, our ability to input to this today is the first time in these meetings with ODOT and others that there's been a crispness, which translates for me to some transparency, not necessarily from them, but often in reaction to what others said about what they haven't said, if that makes sense. And so there was a lifting of my spirit, even while it's clashing with vertigo, that I felt centered in this work. It's not over. I don't know how lasting it will be as a community member and an advocate, but the idea that ODOT is doing or has done the bidding of the majority community that was always about the taking, the removing, dismissing, the disenfranchising. We're sitting and talking about the land that was our land, the community that was our community. So when I think about whether it's 12 feet or whether there has to be space for emergency vehicles, I think about the impact of freeways that never went anywhere, off-ramps that sit, as Kevin so wonderfully articulated. And my concern is, given the history and how long it takes to do different without intention, will we see some of the same in the midst of this and the gains for 150, 200 contractors when it should be 400, 500? Will that look so familiar and similar? What do we do to remember that and to change the dynamic and the outcome now before things are cast in concrete? That is my concern, and it's also the place where I want to pay good attention, good intentions, and good attention to. People don't learn how to do different until they're forced to learn how to do different, no matter how they speak to it. Restorative justice cannot be voiced by those who perpetrated harm without some leavening and some listening and some learning what a restorative justice is. It's more than words on paper or letterhead. And so I have, at times I'm offended, but also hopeful that the inoculation, the vaccination that ODOT needs and would want, if they want to walk differently, will have to come from those who know how to doctor. And I don't feel it can come just by the use of words with little evidence historically or currently, that they understand that page. And so I'm hopeful. I'm willing to continue to be committed, but I'm also very intentional, and I appreciate, Brendan, that we should be comfortable truth telling. That's telling real truth, not our current or original truth from someone else. And that's what I'm hoping. If I can come out of the fogginess of this, I know that ODOT can come out of their fogginess. And today gave me just an edge of what that could look like. But have any of you driven up in Seattle at I-5 and gone under the Washington State Convention Center? the first time I realized that a cover was built to hold a convention center that is on top of and several floors below the cover. I was terrified of being on the freeway with that much concrete above me for a long time. Maybe I don't trust engineers and contractors unless I see them. But the fact that for me is an engineering marvel, but it's also a dedication to a principle they were going to do something different and show you it could happen. And I'd like to believe we don't have to steal their thought. We could do the same thing here. That a lot of community members, I live there, were engaged in that process of building something to hold everyone and doing it differently. And that's kind of a model for me. So thank you for tolerating me today. I'm speaking and also shaking.
You are always eloquently spoken. Thank you so much for your feedback and your thoughts, putting them into this room with all of us, Sharon.
Gina, before we get to our time with you all, I want to make sure in Leslie's absence that we address her questions in regards to schedule delay, what the timelines are based on. She left that in the chat. Also, I just thought that this group needed to know clarity in the difference. There was low risk, there was moderate risk and high risk. The moderate risk and high risk were both given the same amount of time on the slide. And so I wondered if that was a typo or if there was something you could further explain in the group in relationship. I think Nate also chimed in around the schedule. So wanted to give your team an opportunity to share there.
Thank you, Erica. I think that's your universe, Kate. So
Sure.
Both of those questions are, I think, in your universe.
Yeah, those are great questions. And the range in time is back to the issue of, are we talking about overlap with the current project, which does need to go through some type of reevaluation, or are we adding to the end of ODOT's schedule and beyond? So if there's overlap, if the technical studies that would need to be done can start soon, then it would be on more the lower end of the 14 months. If these studies are pushed out, it's more on the 24 months. And in terms of what would be the cause for the time, so it would be a series of technical studies, and this is to, if there was an interest in moving forward with 4 and 5, which are really much pretty more of a departure from the current proposed design. So those would need additional technical studies. We've gotten started with some of them, but we've only gotten so far in our few months here. So the types of studies that would be needed would be to look at property impacts, specifically on the travel lodge, on the south part, if we move the ramps to the south there. So the impacts on the travel lodge and that parking lot. There would need to be a look at perhaps more on the traffic operations. I talked a little bit about some of our findings with the initial modeling of traffic delay, but there would need to be additional studies to make sure that the impacts aren't more than, or if they are more than the environmental assessment 15% design, those would need to be accounted for. We also think that there is an opportunity with more of a focus, again, in this administration on socioeconomic impacts, environmental justice. Those are all part of the NEPA law, the National Environmental Quality Act. But if we could demonstrate through these additional studies the better outcomes that scenarios 4 and 5 really can provide, then it could be a benefit through the environmental reevaluation. So those are some of the studies that we're proposing, and this will all be in our final report. We'll list them all out, and then we associating each of the studies with some times, and it's again a 14 to 24 month kind of time frame to do those studies.
Kate, if I might add to that, like a next step that we'll have to do is coordinate with our federal partners at Federal Highway Administration, as well as they're the ultimate decision maker on the NEPA process and level of documentation. And again, digging deeper into the technical considerations for that delay as well. So kind of building off the good work from the ICA team to better understand what that timeline might be. In the spirit of transparency, I think I've said it here before. We do see that there may be some additional delay beyond that, but looking forward to learning more from the ICA's final report and then working with our federal partners to better understand that.
So I guess I would like to know if there are additional, Kate, you didn't, I think this is, I think, a Kate Brooks or a Nolan question about our, well, I guess you did answer it, moderate to high. The reason we have the same time frames is really about how it's characterized, how the reevaluation's characterized, and then, you know, how soon that work could get started and whether it has some overlap about how many months it would take. So there is a range of schedule risk that we've identified. And as Kate said, there will be a detailed itemization of all the things that we think need to be done in relationship to each of these scenarios, including scenario one.
I believe Mr. Washington might have, we have one additional HAAB member with their hand up. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
to
I
get
wanted to ask one more little small question about, now, if I was mistaken, am I hearing that the highway footprint won't be widened any wider than what it is? Is that what I'm hearing out of the study, that we won't widen? So I'm just curious about something. So y'all help me understand this, because I know that in some cases, right, the highway, the right shoulder is a 10-foot shoulder, right? On the right side. And then on the left side of the shoulder is generally a 4-foot, right? So was it that I heard correctly that there would be a 12 feet lanes and a 12-foot shoulder, right? So how do you get that without widening the footprint of the highway?
I think this is an ODOT question. This isn't related to our work again. So Megan, I'm going to flip this to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Washington, I can answer that for you. So yes, the width of I-5 does get wider with the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. There's the addition of the new auxiliary lane, so that will make it wider. And then where there are more narrow or lacking shoulders today, the full safety shoulders would be added at 12 feet. So yes, the width of the highway does get wider as part of the project.
Okay, does that add an element that we should be concerned about?
Can you help explain that to me a little bit
Well,
more?
I mean, if you say that the highway won't get widened any, right? But now I've heard you said that it would. So at that 12 and 12, would that essentially arrive at the fact that in some places the highway will be wider than in some places? And isn't there 2 spots on that highway where the exchanges, where there's some choke points where you can't do any improvements on? Is that part of this equation still exist?
Yeah, so the area that will become wider is between, so on I-5, between I-84 to the south and then I-405 to the north. And it's all about improving the safety and operations on I-5. So there's the new auxiliary lanes give more time and space for the drivers to merge and weave as you're getting on and off the highway in that location where those 3 interstates intersect. And then the shoulders do provide the safety components. Again, the space for drivers to pull, disabled vehicles to pull out of the way of traffic or for emergency response or potentially for a bus on shoulder in those locations. But to the north of 405 and to the south of 84, the highway remains in its current configuration. So it's still 2 through lanes in each direction. And no auxiliary lanes in those locations and still the limited shoulders. But the bottleneck area, state's top bottleneck is at I-5 between I-84 and I-405. So that's what's being addressed as part of the project.
Okay, but so those two points that are not to be can't be influenced in any kind of way, are they included within those choke points? Will they still exist? And will that same scenario still exist when you, after all the work is still said and done, are those 2 points that you cannot improve upon now, are they influencing the traffic in any kind of way at this point?
So yes, I mean, there will still be 2 through lanes coming into the project area as you're going northbound, and 2 through lanes going out, and then same in the southbound direction. So it's the bottleneck, the state's top bottleneck that's being addressed by this project. But the roadway is not widening north of 405 or south of 84.
So Modique ain't the only one that reads some articles every once in a while. I read a little bit every once in a while, Modique. And one of them things I read that some of them people say that ain't nothing. Them 2 choke points, if you can't address them, you ain't really addressing the traffic flow on the freeway. That's what some of these articles have alluded to in the past.
So Dr. Holt, I think we're done with the questions directed at us, unless I missed something in the chat, which is certainly possible, but I would like to hand this baton back to you to let you, take it from here to, manage the discussion. Or I guess I'm handing it back to Erica. I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's okay. That's all right.
I get confused. You guys sort of, are so interchangeable.
Absolutely.
But we still see you, though, Gina. We ain't done that. It's all good. We'll come back to you at some point.
Yeah. So Erica, I unless you think there's something else that I missed, I'd like to basically hand it back to you. And if there are other questions that come up for us, we're here. We're going to be here through the rest of the meeting, so that we can certainly chime in.
Indeed.
Excellent.
Dr. Holt.
Thank you very much. And Gina, while you didn't know, kicking it to me was the appropriate thing to do.
I mean, what did I say? You guys are interchangeable.
We are. We're a team. It's that teamwork thing that we do. John, thanks for what you raised. We appreciate your comments. Very necessary to highlight and to clarify. I know Brendan wanted to respond to Keith, and then we're going to hear from James Posey, and then we're going to have some continued dialogue. So in that process, John, don't want you to think it's just in there. It isn't.
I can slide it over to the way. It's just like I could strike that from the record, but just as long as y'all heard it.
Oh yeah, we got you. So Brendan, your opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Holt and Mr. Edwards. As I was thinking back on what I just said, I can understand why you jumped to that conclusion. And I want to make something perfectly clear to you and everybody else on this call. While we appreciate a safe, modern transportation system that addresses climate change, we're not here for just that. I didn't take this job for just that. I came here to be a part of the evolution of the change of this agency, and that means showing up. We'll keep showing up. And you have my commitment. I know I can speak on behalf of the agency on that, Mr. Edwards, that we will be committed to do that throughout that process, because that's what we want to see. That's what we want to be a part of. That's the exciting part about the work. Like I said, we like managing and doing our lane in the transportation piece. But one thing we probably need from you and from this group, which is what we've been getting, is to identify those areas, our gaps, and where we need help, and where we need a higher level of sophistication and partnership, which you guys have done. So, Mr. Edwards, I just want to say that to you because I could tell how my comments might have been construed like we are trying to dish it off and walk away from the table. Absolutely not. We're all in on this, and we'll keep showing up.
Thank you, Brendan. We just want to make sure you show up and show out.
Show out in a good way, he means. Show out in a good way, as in produce. Mr. Posey, I'd love to hear from you, sir. Which, by the way, because of your investment and reputation of just being a stakeholder in the community, the exception of your voice at this particular meeting is happening. So here you go, sir.
Well, first of all, let me Thank you all for allowing me to participate. You know, I typically get in these meetings and.
James, we can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Better?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, cool. Listen, I just want to say that I appreciate you all allowing me to kind of say a few things in this meeting. You know, I have to co-act and some of the other meetings, but I'm real passionate about this, as you all know. My question in the chat was, I had some concern about 53 people being represented as the community. That's just being straight up about it. And I don't want to cast any aspersions on Gina and the ICA group, because I don't know what their contract was, what their deliverables were, and how that all played out. But really, I'm trying to draw the contrast between brick and mortar and people. If we're talking a community, then ODOT or whoever needs to invest in a real dynamic approach to getting our community involved. Most of us that's gotten out of kindergarten know that in order to have a bona fide statistical analysis of what we're trying to do, you need to have representative groups and you need to stratify who's in those groups. And let me just say, I know how hard it is to get our community to make comments and to get involved in the process. But what do you expect with a community that's been traumatized and that has issues all across the board? What do you expect? So I'm suggesting that you all got to do a better job of bringing representative numbers of people into this process so that it really will be a community process. You get a different answer from a person who has a degree, who's eating every day, who his house is paid for, the rent is being paid for, from a person whose kids are in jail, who on welfare, who, you know, the range between those individuals that live in our community is broad. But I dare say that it can be done. You can be creative about how you get community input. Gina and her crew, when I look at the technical stuff they're presenting, how in the world can you expect them to do that and get legitimate community input? It doesn't make sense to me. So that's the point I want to say. The other quick thing is, Brendan, he said it. And I don't know if you all are not hearing him, but they build highways. They don't do restorative justice. He's trying to be truthful and honest with you all. They build highways and they have a hard time doing that. I mean, they have a hard time. I watch them. You know, so please, you guys don't expect Brendan, who, by the way, is a fresh breath of air in ODOT, and so is Megan. This is not the ODOT I've been fighting against for 40 years, at least at this level and in this project. But I do want to say this. They're working against the grain internally in their own organization. So many don't care about restorative justice or any of that mess y'all talking about. They're trying to undermine everything Brendan and Megan and everybody does. That's organizational structure within that system that's been racist from the day one. And they're working up against that. So give them a break. They're trying to make this thing work. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that.
Thanks, Mr. Posey. We appreciate it. Let me say two things, and we're going to move into our next section. Two things. One is a offer/request to all of the community members that are involved in the process. If there are people, if there are voices, if there are individuals that you're aware of that you know would benefit from conversations, we are here. We'd love to engage. Or if there are thoughts and ideas, please reach out. We are more than interested in the work. And you hit the nail on the head, Mr. Posey. When you're dealing with when you're trying to communicate to a community that has suffered trauma repeatedly, then we're hesitant to trust. And so part of the challenge has been getting folks into the space to do this work. And then the second thing I will articulate in regard to this moment is if we're going to shift, there's a willingness to shift together. There's this rolling up our sleeves and being willing to go to work. And so it isn't just the community members that were brought into the ICA process. It's also the community members that make up the HAAB and that make up the COAC. So your voices and your influence and your decision also influences how the ESC is going to weigh out the recommendations. So while not robust at the level we'd love it to be, still open to ways to connect that. Don't want to diminish the work that the COAC has done or that the HAAB is doing, and by any means minimize those voices. So I want to put that in the atmosphere too and help us capture that. Erica, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Gina and team, thank you so much. We appreciate all the work that you've done to this point, helping us to dive deeper into what is possible. And ODOT, we thank you and look forward to you all carrying that baton forward with those commitments to be attentive to the community's needs. So during this time, we'd like to open the conversation between the HAAB and the Executive Steering Committee around the particular elements of cover design that you all see as priorities. I know that there were some hands up initially, so I'd like to, I'll start off the conversation with Estelle, and then we can dive further into the discussion. And Nate, I see your hand as well.
Oh, I had a question that might be for the ICA team, just about what would go on top of the covers about like tall buildings. And I may have missed this, so I apologize, about the different scenarios that were put forth. And I didn't know if, in looking at the different scenarios, if we were supposed to consider as an option which scenario would be best for taller buildings, or if that was something we were supposed to kind of keep in mind or give feedback about, because I didn't even think about that or kind of see that as an element that was notated on that. And then all of a sudden I'm kind of seeing that as something that, you know, has its own like bullet point when that's given back to us in feedback. And so I'm kind of wondering, when did that come into play? Is that something that would change or impact which scenario would then be used? And then in the future, you know, when will that then come into play? And then when will, at what point in the process will that, I'm just kind of a little bit, could I get a little bit more information about that element?
Sure. So the initial scenarios, the preliminary scenarios that were presented in work session 2, which was in April, those showed a range of different building heights in each scenario. And there wasn't like a tall scenario and a short scenario. Each scenario had a range of building types. And we focused more on what's in the buildings than we did about what the height is of the buildings. But we know that there are community members who have asked for taller buildings. And I think the request has been in the form of 5 to 6 story buildings. And so some of the buildings that we showed in our renderings were of that 5 or 6 building level. And of course, in the preliminary stage, we weren't doing a whole lot of detailed technical or cost study. So when we came back in work session 3, we had done more of that technical and cost study. And since then, we've begun to identify in more detail what is the difference between a 1 or 2 story building cost and a 5-story building cost. And so you may remember James McGrath also presented some work on ODOT's behalf, and that was sort of in that 1 or 2 zone, most of what he showed. And that was sort of theoretically showing that as you go higher, that risk gets, you know, the risk of additional costs gets higher as well. So we've just now, as of this meeting, been able to put a number on what is that difference. And so the way for you to think about that is that that difference probably exists for all of the scenarios equally. And so one of the things we sort of moved away from was assuming that our scenarios have a specific land use or a specific building height, and you know, this building goes here and this building goes here, and more towards a scenario where we would want to build the highway covers in a way that allowed community-driven entity to make its own decisions later about what's appropriate. whether that be a job training center or housing or community gathering space. The flexibility was important. So the reason we've shown that delta is so that you, when you start to make your deliberations about what you want to, what signal you want to send about your priorities, you might say, okay, I see that number and I'd really rather, you know, keep it low, or I see that number and it's worth it to have more density, more height. And so that, you know, we're trying to be transparent and let you know what that cost difference is, and the ESC know what that cost difference that is, because we have heard that that is a priority for some community members.
But and that wasn't from the HAAB. Was that feedback from? I'm just trying to figure out, like, was that a HAAB? A HAAB, because there were a lot of things mentioned in the ICA presentation, and like things and adjustments based on the timeline. And I'm trying to figure out, were the changes in the ICA timeline and budget, were these things that were made in response to HAAB member feedback? Because I'm kind of curious as to where, because I remember some kind of concerns that as a HAAB member that we had voiced as our choices. We liked 4 or 5, and we like these options, and these are elements that we wanted to see, and kind of getting like a hard no from the ICA team. These are these things, and now it kind of seems that the language has changed. And so I'm kind of wondering what happened in between the last time that these things were presented to us and now. It seems like there's a little bit more flexibility.
Nothing's happened between then and now. I'll indicate a couple things. One, I think the first group to identify a goal of 5-story buildings was the Albina Vision Trust, and they made that request of ODOT and of the Oregon Transportation Commission. And I think it was that conversation several years ago, before we were involved at all, that resulted in the OTC commissioning this study to say what's possible. So for us, it was a natural thing for us to study that as one of the potential outcomes of this process, since that, you know, that was a loud voice that had been expressed. And then we had several members of our community workshops who also said maximizing the development capacity and the value of development on highway covers was a priority. So those are the two places where that has come from, but it came extremely early in the process. And of course, before the process. So it's not something that has come up in the last couple of months.
Okay, yeah, because I'm a new member, so I didn't know that. And then also I kind of wondered, I noticed that when you guys were listing out things that the community had identified as important things, that connecting back to, you know, the Black population that had been scattered out to East Portland, like that wasn't included in the things that you guys read back. And I know, even though that's not like a design element, but I think even though when you're presenting things that the community has identified, that should still always be named, because that should still always be a priority in this project, is continuing to keep in the forefront, connecting that community that has been displaced. And I think that should always be something that ODOT and whatever comes in this project, like that should be a priority that's just like always hammered in. And that's something that ODOT and anybody else remembers in this project, that it's not always about the cap or what's on top of the cap. It's about the people and the community that this is seeking to reconnect. Because if I feel like that kind of is getting lost in the conversation as I was listening to that presentation. I didn't really hear how this was going to actually, it might not be the appropriate part in the presentation. I don't know. How was this going to reconnect us? I don't know.
Well, I think in the interest of full transparency, we should be clear that the ICA work is intended to generate a sense of what's possible, not commit to, you know, this is what is going to happen. And so I think you're correct that we do need to note that that was an important thing for the community, without indicating that, you know, the design of the highway cover is somehow going to make that possible. But we absolutely did hear it from you and others, and we'll note that.
Thank you.
Let me ask a real quick question. I'm sorry, Erica. Okay, let me jump in with a real quick question to the HAAB members. What would an optimal number of stories be for the covers to be able to sustain? If you could dream it out, how what would that look like? Estelle, I saw you unmute.
Oh, I would say limit it, because we don't want this to look like more gentrification. Why would we want this project to look like more gentrification and possibly drive the real estate values up to an unattainable amount that would squeeze out the community that has been able to retain ownership in the area? We don't want this to be the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for the families that have been able to hang on. And also, again, we don't want it to look like anything else that's there. I mean, that's a concern for me that I have with this project. And that's why it kind of caught my attention when you started talking about building huge apartment towers. It's not going to attract affordable housing. Let's be honest about that. Has any housing in Portland that started out as affordable housing really stayed affordable housing and attracted affordable housing to the area? Because that's not what's currently happening in Portland at all. So that's how I feel about it.
Dr. Holt, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And for those of you all who are kind of keeping your videos unmuted, we're getting a significant echo. So I'm asking support staff to mute us if you're not talking. So you'll have to unmute yourself when you come back in.
So I'm going to call each of the HAAB members real quickly. Love to hear you kind of give me a rapid fire popcorn response around that same question. So John?
Well, I mean, I remember some of the earlier conversations, right? So in one of the graphs that the cover committee had brought forward to us, it looked more like certain parts of the covers could have a different type of load-bearing capacity. So the question I guess I have right now is the covers, the smaller ones and the sections and all that, is it uniform capacity, a load-bearing capacity, or is certain segments of it could have more weight on it than others? Because I remember that there was a variety of different buildings placed
at this point. Yeah, at this point, the only thing it's what the actual development or design will be is up to what the community will decide based on the elements. And so I'm just asking for just a simple thought. Would you like 2-story? Would you like 7-story? Would you like just so that we get a real sampling, and then we're going to talk about elements collectively. So.
Well, I think capacity should be roughly at about 4 to 5 stories.
Thank you, sir. I'll go to Keith. Keith, your thoughts on that? I think you're still muted. Still muted, sir. I'll let you get unmuted. Modica, I'm coming to you next.
Why don't we move to the next person and come back? There we go, Mr.
There we go.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that last piece there. Can you bring me up to speed?
Just number of stories. If you could pick a number of stories to go on top of the cover, what would that look like for you? 1, 5, 9?
I would probably say no more than 3 stories.
Okay, thank you. And to Mr. Modica.
And if I could, Dr. Holt, the reason I say that is because I get concerned about buildings getting too tall and obstructing view and landscape and that kind of thing. And so I think that 3 is plenty, and it will still satisfy our needs.
I appreciate that. Mr. Modica.
Yes, well, I believe I'm probably an outlier on this. I've actually been informed by some individuals that the zoning would not support what I think is important, which is single family or shared walled homes, no more than 2 next to each other. Everybody wants their piece of the rock. You're gonna return generational wealth opportunities. You want a house, you want a slice of yard, you want some place to park my vehicle, maybe a little backyard. Zoning can be changed. We've seen it changed all over the place. You start putting multi-story buildings on top of that lid, it's not going to be for people's livability. It's going to be like the Pearl. Not going to be for people that are still in Northeast hoping to come back home. I mean, that's the ground truth. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be combative about it, but that's where I stand.
You're muted. You're muted, Dr. Holt.
I keep muting myself. I apologize. We're going to go to Ms. Sharon Gary Smith.
Ms. Sharon is not feeling well, so I'm not sure that she's still with us.
Okay. We will move then to Ms. Leslie Goodlow.
Although I agree with what Kevin said, that it would be great to build single family houses. I know how things are, and changes residential infill, that's likely not going to be a possibility, and particularly to get it funded. That being said, I would say no more than 3-story buildings for some of the same reasons other folks have given, because of view and not making it like the Pearl. So 3 stories.
Thank you very much. Bishop Probasco, sir.
Yes, I'm finally back. I'm sorry, I had a multiple of problems. I just got back into the scene, so please forgive me for that. It was technology. But anyway, I believe that I'm with the 2 to 3 story thing, because if we're going to have any type of restorative justice of trying to go back to at least go backward in time and make something that's going to be a multi-use situation, yes, we can have 2 to 3 stories. But if we're going to create some sort of well-to-do, you have to have some sort of a homey atmosphere there. You're not going to get a homey atmosphere with 6 and 7 story buildings. It's ridiculous. It's not even, and you talk about bringing back some things that we've been missing. I think we've just got to make the best of what we have. We have a limited amount of space, and so there's not enough space to create all the things that we've been talking about. We've talked about a lot of things that we wanted. And if we put up some massive story buildings there, it will crush the whole idea of people wanting to come to an area where there's a lot of big buildings and this type of thing. The homing aspect of it will be gone. So that's all I have to say. It's going to have to be a shorter operation with some good financial management to make it work.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate that. Did I miss any of the HAAB members that are here? Okay, I don't think I did. Real quickly, James, and then we're going to talk about elements. And I know I've got some ESC members. I got you, Nate. I got you, buddy. I haven't forgotten you.
Yeah, so can I talk?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to say real quickly that the truth of the matter is I watched the ICA talk about restorative justice and political dynamics that are happening right now. And what's frightening for me is that Megan and the IGA are still talking mush in terms of the delay and the time frame. People out here really need to know that this 24-month period is just for the study. No work has started, nothing has started. We're just basically trying to do the study for the 24-month period. During that same period of time, Biden's in, the cycle's gonna come around. Who's to say he's gonna be in office for the next 4 years? So you all brought up that whole piece about, well, we got a political situation here that aligns, but if you do the study, all the time it's gonna be eaten up that gives you this political advantage. And you just might as well accept that nothing's going to happen from the standpoint of construction until at least 24 months out. You lose the you risk the possibility of losing the best contractor we ever had. Now I know that's one element, but Moreland is not going to be around necessarily. Everything changes within 2 years, and you ought to say that, Megan. You ought to tell them that it could be as much as 7 or 8 years if we delay this thing. You ought to tell them the maximum amount of time, if all this goes well, everything goes right, You ought to just tell them we're at least 3 years. You ought to say that and say it loud. Maybe you have said it, but I ain't heard you. Tell me.
Yes. Thanks, James. Should I comment? Meg, quick.
Yeah, in response to that, James, I do think for some of the elements, we are looking at a potential, 3+ year delay. I'll be very specific about that. It's really related to the ramp relocations, but there are some really other exciting elements in there that are lower risk in terms of scheduled delay to be incorporated. And so again, there's more work to be done with our federal highway partners on that, but we do have that difference of an ICA team in terms of some of the elements taking up to 3 years.
So you're saying that 3 years out, everything could be changed. Everything could be different. Nothing could be the same. We could start all over again. That's what you're really saying.
Thanks,
I
James.
think there's a win-win. I think there's a way to modify the design with some of the creative ideas that are coming forward in the community vision. But I also think there's more work to do on understanding what the schedule implications, the true schedule implications of some of those might be.
Nate.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and thank you everybody else on this joint meeting. I've just got a couple comments and recommendations. One, I'll start off with, I think we need more of these joint meetings from the facilitation team. I've mentioned that many times. I think, again, we can't be divided in these conversations, meaning having separate meetings when we should be meeting together more often. We don't have a lot of people, so it seems like that should work well. Second, I really do appreciate what I've heard from the HAAB. I think the HAAB should be a part of the ongoing evolution of that governance that we heard about, so that there's maybe some real accountability or community oversight on the planning of these visionary developments over time. But what I think I'm most interested in, talking about more is what I heard the HAAB say about the 3 to 4 stories. I don't normally pull out all the things that I do at NAMAC, but one of the things I do is I serve as the chair for the Portland Housing Advisory Commission. So when Leslie and others like Kevin speak about how these projects feel like Pearl District, what it really reminds me of from my days working in the Housing Bureau as a construction manager is South Waterfront. And I want to draw people to attention in South Waterfront, because not only did you have affordable housing, but you had market rate housing. And if you went and surveyed the people that live in those housing, they would tell you that they very rarely go on their porch. On those big skyscraper decks that you see along the highway, guess what? People don't go on their decks because of the air admission qualities. So unless we're talking about spending a lot of more money for people to stay indoors instead of outdoors, then we shouldn't even be talking about housing on this cap, period. And as somebody who's an expert in this field, construction and housing, all we should be talking about on this cap is wealth generation for our community. Restorative jobs, restorative justice starts with a job. All of our Black families came here for a job. They didn't come here to just hang out in the, white utopia, if you will, from the days of Oregon being established. It came because of a job. And it angers me that we even sit and have these conversations and we deal around with these real things. Check the African-American unemployment rate right now. 3 times our white counterparts. Check our income status. Like, who is gonna own and operate these great developments that we wanna see over time if we're not already equipping people with jobs? So I guess my point being, at the end of the day, it would be nice for us to get a hybrid, win-win scenario where our contracting community can continue to work on this project, provide to our community that needs jobs and formerly incarcerated people. We're on the helm of Juneteenth that just passed. Rent moratoriums are up at the end of this month. People don't have a dang job. They're going to be homeless on the streets. We got our highest rate of violence with gun violence. Like, I just don't know what we're talking about if we're not saying we need to keep this gym, which on this cap should be all focused on workforce development. Nobody has to own this little cap, and we can build housing around the community all day long. But this cap I'm hoping we end this conversation, because this is probably the 6th month of going on around the same conversation when we haven't had one meeting. And I would ask the HAAB, we had one meeting talking about what kind of jobs that we need in the community around construction, around small businesses, which if you look at TriMet, and James Posey was around during that day, many businesses in the community benefited from the building of all that light rail. And so here we are 20 years later, one of the contractors and many others who built their business off of that and provided many jobs in our community. I don't care about no developments, because that ain't happening today. We need a plan for that long term, but we also need the short term plan and stick to the options that are allowing us to move forward. I'm not pitching nobody on the HAAB. Y'all make your own decisions, but look in your community and see if people got money in their pocket right now. And I can show you people in construction that can own houses all day long and renting out houses to other people who don't have houses. So I'm just saying, I hope after this meeting today that we can get to some closure and actually get to the real stuff that helps our community today, not tomorrow or 5-10 years, today. So I just wanted to share that. 2 hours of waiting. You know, I'm not used to waiting that long to talk, but I respect everybody and everything that's been mentioned. And I hope we get back on track after today.
Appreciate that, Nate. Thank you. Let's talk some elements. Let's talk about the elements, if at all, there are specific elements, and that could be small business development, small business incubation opportunities. It could be a variety of things that have been covered or that maybe were missed in this whole process. So I'd love to hear, what are the elements that we highlight, prioritize, value for cover opportunities? Who would like to jump in first?
I'd like to add also that in line with what Dr. Holt just said, the other elements that we're asking you to consider are around, single cap, whether or not you specifically like the wiggle on Vancouver or the change to the Flint interchange, some of those elements also. So I want to open that up as well.
As you look at this, it looks familiar. It should look familiar. It's been part of the presentation. The cover concept elements. Any comments, questions, thoughts? And this is not only for the HAAB, this is also the ESC. Please feel free.
Can you just give an explanation of each one of these concepts?
Absolutely. Let's go back to the ICA team. And I don't remember on the team who explained, but ICA?
I believe it was Kate Brooks.
Kate, do you want to explain these?
Sure.
And then also make sure that people understand that it's not like you can it's not an open laundry list. It's in some cases it's an either or. That's going to be important for people to know. It's not like you assemble the three that you want, because some of them are an either or. So make sure.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and again, I apologize for my voice. So the way that this was set up was really in response to kind of the evolution of changes from the EA base case to our proposed scenarios. So the single continuous cover is a change from the EA. The EA shows two separate covers. Element B refers to really scenario one, in which we're proposing to cover the ramp terminals with structures. Element C is the street configuration that really refers to the restore the grid concept, which is reconnecting Flint and Hancock. You have that option, or you have option E, which is merging Flint and Vancouver. That's an either or. Element D is reconfiguring the Green Loop corridor on Broadway and Weidler. So bringing that Green Loop, which really is intended to be a linear open space. It's not a bike lane for through traffic and commuters. It's really more about gathering. So our intent here was really to bring that through the neighborhood. I'm sorry, as opposed to on the Clackamas Bridge crossing. Sorry, we're removing the child. The alternatives for ramps really are F and G, and element F is relocating just the southbound off ramps. You'll see those in hybrids. So those are in, I believe, all hybrids 1, 2, and 3. And then the addition of element G is relocating the northbound ramps. And so the combination of F and G really are shown in our scenarios 4 and 5. Hopefully that's helpful.
And I want to thank you for that. This is Keith again. I want to thank you for that. But I've been in construction for over 50 years, and I can look at these, and I know I have a hard time conceptualizing what this looks like in the comprehensive overall picture of the covers, because I see like 7 pieces here, but I don't, and I know if I have a hard time figuring out what in the hell this is and what it looks like, I know people that aren't familiar with construction are looking like, what the hell? This is looks like some red and blue and black drawings on paper.
Yep.
And I have no idea what this looks like in the big picture.
Can we put that on the scenarios? Can we put these elements back into the scenario? I believe we've got that on the slide.
And I hate to say this, but this is the kind of thing that causes, I'm gonna say it causes mistrust, because if you're not a layperson that is familiar with construction, you're gonna look at that and say, well, that looks like a bunch of gibberish to me. And okay, here we go again. They're gonna show us a bunch of gibberish, and we're supposed to understand. And we ask questions. Makes it seem like we're ignorant, and that in and of itself is not appropriate for giving a presentation. I mean, those 7 photos, those 7 drawings should have been 7 big picture drawings showing what each one of them looks like not in the abstract, but in the conceptual when it's finished, what they look like. Because I can tell you, we've got, I don't know how many folks we got on here. We got 44 people on here, and I bet 40 of them are confused as hell about what the hell that look means and what it's going to look like at the end of the day if we take A through G, either one of them.
Thanks, Keith. Is there a possibility of connecting that to the scenarios, taking those designs and being able to explain it?
I think philosophically, what I would do is just thank you, Mr. Edwards, and just say, I agree. We were asked to break out the elements after we had showed scenarios, because there was a feeling that people may like certain moves, but not feel comfortable recommending a whole scenario. So we broke that out. I agree with you, it's confusing. We were trying to be accommodating to that request. So my apologies that it may have been accommodating and confusing at the same time.
And Nolan, I would say the other thing to Keith's comment, which I think is spot on, is that when we first presented the elements, they were presented in relationship to the concepts. I mean, when we first introduced those elements, which I think, we had all the concepts so we could go back and forth and show you how they looked in the context of the scenario. But to just look at them here without any context is not helpful.
Yeah, and I also wanted to jump in. I saw kind of a question in the chat as well, but I think going back to a prior question is just clarifying that the current project design that includes the highway cover can accommodate 2-story buildings throughout the cover. And there is a point location on the north that can accommodate up to 4 stories. So Mr. Washington, I think it was you that asked that question earlier. So I just wanted to make that clear that the current project design does accommodate 2-story buildings and then up to a 4-story building on the very north end.
Awesome. And thanks, Keith, for highlighting that. Here's a great opportunity for us to come back together now that we've heard the OTC decision is not going to happen in July. And it's been recommended to have conversations together more frequently. It gives us an opportunity to go back and look at those scenarios, connect them to the elements, and be able to talk through them as a group together so that we're reducing and removing exactly what we're concerned about. Keith perfectly communicated. We are concerned about not presenting a scenario that is a bait and switch, that creates another here we go again, or that they're talking in mumbo jumbo and that things aren't being clear, that the community is being railroaded. One of the things we're committed to making sure it doesn't happen is that the community suffers. When I say we're, I'm talking Tri-Excellence. We're committed to making sure the community is not injured. And I believe that ODOT has that commitment as well to do things differently. So thank you for raising it. Mr. Washington?
Thank you. You know, I'm a little confused at the aim of what this particular segment is aimed at us achieving, you know, but I was listening to Nate and, you know, and as I look over the last 4 or 5 years of this project, you know, and how the caps, the original caps became a conversation and then what expounded upon that conversation. And I think some of the questions that we asked was, you know, what was the air quality? How did we affect the air quality inside of these tunnels? And, you know, what's the livability, the air quality and livability on the cap? What would they look? And there were a lot of mitigating answers and things that came as a result of it. You know, and they were saying about, and then of course, but the question that I originally had was, why did we start talking about building a high rise, you know, versus the question that ODOT had already knew what the capacity was going to be and what would be the most effective use of those caps, in which 2-story buildings, and how we had in different sections of those caps, we had recognized that a 1-story building could exist on this cap and 2-story on this and a 3 on the other. But the point that I'm making there is that I'm still hearing the fact that building wealth is the primary catalyst for this community, and that in that center of that aspect of things, how much utilization can we get to achieve that end goal on those caps, number one. So, and looking at the decline of businesses in the district and, you know, how we begin to impact that. But at the same time, we had also discussed that we didn't want barren land on those caps neither. Is that whole thing created another opening for a variety of other things. You know, so the question that I'm having here in this environment is, what's really the reality factors? What really do we want, you know, in this space? You know, and then how does what we want achieve some of the goals in which we want for long-term generational wealth in our community? So how do we activate that? And then the other thing is that I constantly keep hearing coming up in this conversation is the timelines and the fear factors that come into what drives that. You know, well, the money's going to go away, the possibility, but where's that coming from? Okay, this whole sense of scare tactic that if we don't do something now, okay, that the money's going to go away. And then at the other point is, which is fair and understanding, is that the extenuating circumstances of what poverty achieves, you know, the outcomes of what that poverty achieves if we don't get that ignite to be able to get some money flowing into our community, because we see the peripheral proliferation of byproduct of not having money occur, such as the murders and people not having all those types of things. So, you know, so I'm trying to wade through what really is what we should be talking about here as a community, you know, because we need to do something right now. And if the opportunity presents itself to do something to begin to mitigate some of these things that are occurring, because as the summer and stuff go on and all that, the murders ain't gonna come down if we still in poverty. They're gonna keep proliferating. So And then at the same time, I don't want scare tactic to go to say, okay, well, we can't be reasonable in understanding that the win-win is how do we mitigate this empty space time to be able to continue to grow onto the bigger picture, but how do we feed ourselves right now, getting to that place? You know, so those are the concerns that I'm having in this dialogue. Because to me, it don't matter what you build, as long as something is on that, there's an asset that comes out of that, that we're growing in our capacity to help serve our community, to get our long-term wealth on, and that we're able to somehow or another care for ourselves and our community in such a way that this project will help us make a contribution to that. Because we can't look at our lives being circled on some caps. This ain't the end. This is not our community. A cap is not our community. We can't build no community on a cap, but we can add to a community and grow it. So
Absolutely.
some of the concerns that I'm having right now as to finding some clarity as to what are the focal points on what we really want to be talking about right now.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Very well communicated. Part of it is captured through the ICA's work. And then part of it is this work that we're doing collectively together. And I said, and I will restate, we've got to continue in this space, in this dialogue, to identify those things. And the priorities will come out of this work to specifically speak to the very things, to develop those answers. The ones who have the answers are us, the people who are weighing into this space and doing this work. It's not of them, where they will tell. It is the work of us collectively together. So appreciate you in this space. Appreciate everyone's contributions tonight. We are at 6:27. And I know, Megan, you wanted to highlight something that needs to be communicated. Everybody needs to understand as it relates to the caps. I hate to potentially open up a new can of worms, but we are going to be back together to dialogue. After Megan's comments, Erica, I will give it to you to wrap us up for the night.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling on me, Dr. Holt. And this is in response to Estelle. I think I saw in the chat some comments around ownership. As Brendan articulated, it is our job to make sure that we are showing up and telling the truth. So ODOT, for the highway covers, for the caps, ODOT will always own the structure that's crossing over I-5. And so for the land that's on top of the highway covers, there will have to be a creative approach and a new approach for ODOT for long-term leasing of that land, but there isn't the opportunity for the full ownership of that land as ODOT has to retain the structure and own the structure that's crossing over the interstate system. That said, there are some properties off of the cover, immediately adjacent to the cover, that we are using for construction, but that we will not need after construction. And then those are the sites that we have the opportunity for the ownership. So I just wanted to be really clear and open about that, Estelle, in response to your comment.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate you being responsive. Natalie, if you'll share the next step slide for me, I would appreciate it. While she's doing that, I want to sincerely thank Gina. I know she's a member of this community. Appreciate her work in soliciting input from various community folks. Thank you to Nolan, Charles, and the ICA team. Though this is our last opportunity in this kind of setting to engage, I know that you all are working on your final report, and HAAB members, please feel free to communicate things to me. I will make sure that all parties, that Gina and the group have access to knowing your thoughts if they're further in regards to the ICA work. It has been a lot of work in a little amount of time, and they have worked tirelessly to present what they heard from those who participated in the workshops. Next slide, Ms. Natalie. So again, you have heard repeatedly, we need to have these continued dialogues between the Executive Steering Committee, the HAAB, as well as the COAC. And as we look ahead, we know that there will be an opportunity for a highway cover scenario recommendation. As you heard Megan say, we're going to be taking the information from the ICA's report and working alongside the community to develop something that we all can be proud of, that there's a scenario that wins for interacting with the community now in regards to those jobs and DBE, as well as maximizing the developable land on and off the covers. We're going to be looking at some other elements in regards to this project as well. So we want you to stay focused. We'll be utilizing your voice, your expertise, your input as we move forward on the local streets, on the early work packages, other ideas in regards to the southbound realignment. The 30% design package is coming, and so we'll be looking for some input in regards to that and performance measures in regards to this process. Natalie, you can remove the slides. Thank you to the support team. They're always so responsive to us as we facilitate these conversations. We are 1 minute over, but I just want to thank all of you for your engagement today and know that you've been heard. I appreciate your input. Mr. Posey, we thank you for joining us tonight. We ask you to stay attentive as we will be trying to facilitate some further conversation between both groups. The Executive Steering Committee will be having their meeting on next week, and then we'll be able to share with you how we move forward. So Megan and team, thank you all for also being here and being responsive. I'm confident that we can do something great together. Megan, were you wanting to say something additional? Okay, well, thank you all. Grab you some dinner in the sunshine and have a wonderful evening.
Blessings.